Welcome to the Innovative Assessment Program's Professional Learning Series. The Louisiana Department of Education is committed to developing the Innovative Assessment Program in partnership with Louisiana schools and school systems. As part of that commitment, LDOE and partner systems have developed this professional learning series. My name is Nathan Dady, and I am partnering with the Louisiana Department of Education to present this information. In this session, we will be reviewing the Score Report Reflection Guide. This session is part of a larger professional learning series designed to help schools and school systems with the implementation of the Innovative Assessment Program, or the IAP for short. For any questions about the IAP, please contact Ruth Caluette, the Innovative Assessment Program Coordinator, or Kathy Judy, the Supervisor of Assessment Content in English Language Arts. During Session 5, we took a look at the 4 sections of the score report: the overall results, the grouped roster, the classroom profiles, and the comparison section. During this session, we will use the Score Report's Reflection Guide in conjunction with your classroom score report. This reflection guide is meant to help connect the results of the IAP to potential instructional next steps. Materials for today, including an example classroom score report and the Score Report Reflections Guide, are available online at the Zendesk website. You might want to pause the video and make sure you have downloaded the example classroom score report or you have your own classroom score report, since a lot of this session walks through that report. Let's take a look at our agenda for this session. First, we will set the context by providing some framing information for the IAP, which was also shared in prior sessions. Then we will spend a few minutes orienting you to the Score Report Reflections Guide. We will also talk about some additional materials that you should have at hand. We will then walk through using the 2 main sections of the Score Report's Reflection Guide. Finally, we'll end with a brief reflection opportunity. Also note that periodically a pause image will appear on the slide as an indication that you might want to stop the video and review the materials in more depth. When you are done, hit play again. We always begin these sessions with a review of our overall goal for English Language Arts, which is for all students to read, understand, and express their understanding of complex grade level texts. That goal informs the structure of the Innovative Assessment Program, which is first intended to provide students with opportunities to demonstrate what they know and can do grounded in the text they have already studied in class, and 2, provide teachers with common assessment information at the end of each unit, which allows them to use that information to adjust how they support students in the next unit. The Innovative Assessment Program, or the IAP, connects state summative assessment to the ELA Guidebook's curriculum. This connection means that the IAP reports can be used to inform instruction in your upcoming or current ELA Guidebooks unit. For the 22-23 school year, the student and classroom score reports have been updated for grades 6, 7, and 8. In addition, there is a new supporting document, the Score Report Reflections Guide for grades 6, 7, and 8. This document is meant to help support decision-making on instructional next steps based on student performance on each section of the IAP, as well as your own classroom assessment observations. Moving on to the second section, we'll be going through a brief overview of the Score Report's Reflection Guide before we begin using it. After the initial introductory text, the Score Report Reflection Guide has 2 main sections. The first major section contains a series of questions within tables that you will use in conjunction with your classroom score report. The second major section is a series of supports guidance tables that you will use after you have grouped students by learning needs based on the questions in the prior section. Please pause the video and take a few moments to read the introductory section and orient yourself to the main sections of the Score Report Reflection Guide. When you are done, hit play again. This flowchart illustrates the process of using the Score Report Reflection Guide for the knowledge group. For each group within the grouped roster section, the reflection guide has a number of corresponding questions. Looking at the students in the score report, the reflection guide asks you to draw on recent classroom writing tasks and think through a set of reflection questions. Doing so lets you potentially better match students to the instructional next steps or levers provided in the section half of the reflection guide. We'll walk through this process later within the video. In this section, we'll review what other materials you'll need to have access to while you use the Score Report Reflection Guide. Specifically, there are 2 sets of materials you'll need. First, the IAP Classroom Score Report, and 2, student work samples from a recent writing task. In addition to the Score Report Reflections Guide, you will need your most recent IAP Classroom Score Report. As you might remember from the previous module, the Classroom Score Report has 4 sections. When working through the Score Report Reflections Guide, the most relevant section is the Grouped Roster section. The grouped roster section organizes students into three groups: those who scored weak or moderate on each of the three sections: knowledge, application, and synthesis. The reflections guide is organized around these groups. In addition, the profile section of the classroom report shows all of the score profiles and how many students are in each group for a more fine breakdown of your class. Please make sure that you have a classroom score report near you before proceeding to the rest of this video. You might have noticed that in the introduction to the score report's reflection guide, we recommend that you gather some student responses to one or more recent curriculum-embedded writing tasks to review in conjunction with the score report. We suggest that you pick a recent piece of writing that your students did that will give you insight into the current strengths and weaknesses. And perhaps you're asking yourself why. Well, first, no assessment is 100% reliable. If we could go back in time and retest your students, most would get similar scores, but some would get scores that are different. In addition, the IAP results provide one valuable snapshot of student performance. And considering the IAP results alongside the results of a classroom writing task provides a much richer picture of student performance and learning. That is why we ask you to consider the most recent information you have access to. For example, if you are surprised by a student who scored lower than you expected in the IAP, you might dismiss the IAP results. However, if you go back to a recent curriculum-embedded writing task, you might realize that the student has been struggling and you hadn't quite noticed because in earlier writing tasks they had done well. Conversely, you might notice another student who usually performs well in class score the moderate performance level on the knowledge reporting category. However, in looking at recent assessments, you realize that you don't have any concerns about this student's ability to identify key ideas from text. So you might decide to keep an eye on this student, but that he or she does not need any additional support at this time. So pause now and take a look both at your IAP assessment data and your own classroom assessment data and see what patterns you can identify. Next, we'll turn to the reflection questions section of the Score Report Reflections Guide. Pause the video here if you need to gather student work or class score reports before we begin. Now we are going to begin to work through the reflection guide. The first set of questions in the questions table asks you to consider the information in the score report for the group of students who scored weak or moderate on the knowledge section. These students are listed in the group roster section of your score report, and specifically the knowledge table. The reflection questions are intended to help you identify what each student is struggling with. The questions are ordered with the most pressing issues first. In other words, you might not yet know if a student struggles to select the best evidence to support their argument or ideas, which is asked in question 3, or if they're struggling to independently read the task itself, question 1. Also note that each question uses the word typically. In other words, although these students have been flagged in this category as needing additional support, this is where you'll need to look across the IAP report along with your own classroom assessments and observations. This allows you to think about the multiple sources of data, which can let you build a more reliable and complete picture of student strengths and weaknesses than any single source of data. So first, think about this group of students and identify which ones don't typically, based on the IAP data and other assessment data, understand how to approach the assignment. You'll write these students' names in the box opposite of question 1. In the next section, you'll get information about strategies you can employ for this subgroup of students. Assuming not all students fall into this category, for the remaining students you will shift to question 2 and consider whether they typically do not understand or know how to use academic and domain-specific language. For the students you answered yes to this question for, write their name in box 2. Again, there'll be guidance for these students later. Finally, for the students who remain, you will look at question 3 and consider whether any of them are struggling to select the best evidence. Again, put their name in box 3. You may have 1 or 2 students who are flagged, but do not fall into any of the current categories. Keep their name in mind as you can continue to consider the later questions in the next section of the guidance. This example shows how a class of 22 students grouped into the knowledge, application, and synthesis groups, depending on their performance ratings. The first set of questions that we just reviewed applied, in this example, to the 10 students in the knowledge group who scored weak or moderate on the knowledge section. Let's see what happens as a teacher considers the first set of reflection questions for this group. After reviewing a recent classroom writing task for this group of 10 students, the teacher identifies just one student who is struggling significantly with understanding what the IAP questions are asking. So she notes that student's name down for question 1. She then noted another 4 students who are struggling within a recent classroom writing task, as well as other assignments, to understand and use academic and domain-specific vocabulary. So she noted them down in the second box. Finally, in her review of a recent writing task, she noted that almost all the remaining students struggled to select the best evidence and support their answers, so she noted those students in the third and final box. Student 1 was the only student for whom none of the 3 reflection questions seemed to apply. This student was not always a strong writer, but was a good reader and someone who was able to understand what assignments asked of him and responded well. The teacher looked at this student's total profile of ratings on the IAP and saw that he was rated weak on both knowledge and application sections and did not complete the final writing prompt. This seemed unusual for this student, and the teacher wondered if something had happened on the testing days or if he had not been feeling well. The teacher decided to keep the student in mind when she got to the synthesis section and reflect more on his essay writing from class, even though she didn't have any IAP data for that student on that section. Now pause the video here and work through the first set of reflection questions for your students if you're working through your classroom score report. Once you're done, hit play.
You are now going to repeat the process for students who are placed into the application group. That is, those students who are strong in the knowledge section but weak or moderate in the application section. This suggests that they may be struggling to transfer appropriate knowledge and skills to the ALA tasks independently. In this instance, there is only one reflection question to consider. As you look at a recent writing assignment, as well as other assessments for this group of students, note which of them seem to struggle with comprehension when looking at a new text on their own. Note down those names in this table. If there are students in this group on the IAP report who do not typically have this type of struggle, consider the questions in the final table within the synthesis section. Pause the video here and step through this process for the students in your class who are within the application group. When you are done, hit play again. You are now going to repeat this process for a third and final time for the students who are placed in the synthesis group. That is, those students who are strong in the first 2 sections. Note that unlike the prior sections, this last section may include students who are weak or moderate on the synthesis section, as well as students who are strong on the synthesis section. Students who are weak or moderate on this section may be struggling with some aspects of writing, and here there are 3 reflection questions to consider. As you look at some recent assignments and assessments for this group of students, note whether the first question describes a typical struggle they have. If not, move on to the second and third questions. Where the questions describe something you are seeing in their writing, please note their names in the table. Pause the video here and step through this process for students in your class who are in the synthesis group. When you are done, hit play again.
You should now have a completed table that looks something like this. You might not have identified students for every section, and that's okay. Within the next section, we will walk you through using the support guidance resource to identify supports that may help students in each of those groups. The final section of the support document is in many ways the most important because it moves from analysis of your students' data to action by providing you with suggestions for how you might want to support the various groups of students you just identified. Remember that you don't have to review and enact all of the suggestions at once, but can quickly skim to see what might be relevant and what you might want to come back to later. For this section, we suggest that you print out the support guidance, grab a highlighter, and some sticky notes. So go ahead and pause the video here if you need to grab supplies. When you are ready, hit play again. There are 7 sections in the score report guide, one for each of the reflection questions you've already answered. We can see here on the screen the section for the first question, the first of those 7 sections. Each one follows the same structure, organized around 4 additional questions. At the top of each table is a reflection question you've already answered and identified students for. On the left-hand side, you can see 4 additional questions. The first question, what inferences can be made from this data point, is essentially describing what you may have already noticed about the group of students you identified in responding to that first question. That is, what are they struggling with? The next question provides motivation for why it's important to help students succeed in this area. That is, what are they being held back from being able to do? Or conversely, what do we want them to do? The answer to the third question draws your attention to specific parts or aspects of the ELA guidebooks lessons that will support students as they engage with this need. And the fourth and final section has some very practical suggestions on what you can do next. So pause the video here and skim through this document to get a sense for its structure. Also note whether you have students in each section of the worksheet. If not, there may be some sections of the score report guidance that you can skip for now. When you're done reading, hit play again. There are lots of suggestions for ways in which you can help your students, particularly within the last section of the table, the how can I pull a lever tomorrow to support my students section. The number of student groups and possible levers to pull might seem daunting at first, but you don't have to try to do all of the levers at once. Instead, think strategically through the levers you can introduce and when. You may not be able to get to all levers or groups, and that's okay. What is important to think about is how you can best help your students and integrate these levers as opportunities present themselves. You may also find it useful to have these discussions with your grade level teaching team. We're also not suggesting that every lesson is differentiated for every group of students you identified, and some of the suggestions may be things that you're already doing. The guidance provided here is meant to be used flexibly based on your professional judgment. Making connections to your curriculum and lesson planning take time, and we suggest you do this in stages. You can start with the support guidance that corresponds to the first reflection question, where you categorize students into the largest groups of students. And maybe you did not identify any students for reflections questions 1 and 2, but had several for questions 3. So you might start with the support guidance for question 3. Alternatively, you might have the largest group of students identified for, say, question 4. So you might start with the support guidance for question 4. Wherever you choose to start, read the various actions that you could take to help this group of students tomorrow using your ELA Guidebook's curriculum. Identify what seems most useful and that you can implement, using sticky notes, highlighting, etc. to mark up your curriculum materials like lesson plans, so you can remember what you are planning to do. Some of the actions might be tomorrow, but some could be next week or part of a weekly routine. Some of the guidance might only apply to a particular kind of curriculum task. It is important to connect the guidance provided in this document to your curriculum resources and make it easy for you to remember. For example, you might want to write students' names on sticky notes and add specific actions to help you remember which students need these actions. If you're not able to work through all of the relevant support sections at one time, the last thing you should do is make a plan for when you will be able to do so, when you can find some time. So let's close out this session by taking a few moments to reflect on what we've learned. And in particular, you should reflect on what did you learn from examining your student score reports in conjunction with the reflection guide. Thank you for your time.